That's not supposed to be breaking health barriers. Wrong screen. Okay, let's get going here. You are listening to Global Affairs Unfiltered. All right, wrong opener. You know, there may be, nah, I'm not going to worry about it. There's nobody there anyway. What difference does it make? All right, I'll just wait till somebody shows up. Sammer, I don't think you're on there yet. All right, let's, so to continue with that line of thinking, I want to, a very good friend of mine sent me this video, and you know what, I probably could play it. I could probably play some of it on the, just an incredible interview that goes on between Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac and Dr. Omar Suleiman, an imam, an Islamic imam, and a Lutheran minister in Palestine. And I am not broadcasting at K-Talk right now because they've got, you know, the usual K-Talk problems. Paul's trying to do what he can to bring it up, but I've got the streamers, so, which is why I much prefer to talk to you guys anyway. Because if I don't simulcast with K-Talk, and it's just the stream, boy, I can bring all kinds of stuff on here, interviews and these other kinds of things that. Let me see. Let me see what I can. Nah, I have to experiment with it a little bit more. I don't want it to lay an egg. Anyway, in this interview, let me think where you can go. It's at Yaqeen, Y-A-Q-E-E-N, Y-A-Q-E-E-N, and you would search for the Reverend Dr. Munther, M-U-N-T-H-E-R, Isaac. And what he's doing is he's calling out the Christian Zionists. One thing I've always had a problem with, and back in my Farside days, and I don't know if I'm happy about that or not, but back in my extremely overactive Mormon involvement back 50 years ago, after I got home from my Mormon mission, I was giving firesides. I was giving firesides up until, I don't know, 1980, 1981. And that's back when the church allowed that. They allowed firesides to take place. They're not too wild about that anymore. Because, well, for obvious reasons. When you start introducing ideas, not introducing ideas, talking about things that you wouldn't be talking about in sacrament meeting, it stimulates faith. And when you start having people who start having a lot of stimulated faith, you have problems because they get in touch with the Spirit. And when you have a bunch of people who are in touch with the Holy Spirit, and they start exhibiting the gifts and the fruits of the Spirit as are elucidated clearly in Galatians and Corinthians in the New Testament, you have people that are hard to control. So back in those days, you might have been able to call me a Christian Zionist, maybe, because I fell into the cult of believing Israel first. Well, I've come to my senses since then and realized that some of the Jews in Israel are of the tribe of Judah, and a lot of them aren't. And they're not at all what would be considered God's promised people. In fact, I would call them the devil's promised people because you can tell people by their behavior. And when you see the destruction that is going on and the genocide that is going on that we were so shocked when we learned about the Holocaust and we learned about the Warsaw Ghetto and we learned about Buchenwald and Auschwitz and Dachau and all the other concentration camps, that such horrible atrocities committed against human beings by other human beings could possibly exist in a world apparently, allegedly controlled by a loving God. But now it's going on today, and I absolutely eschew the title of Christian Zionist. And so listening to this very, very enlightening interview that's only about 30, I think it's 30 minutes long. And I'm going to tell you once again where you can go. It's at Yaqeen, Y-A-Q-E-E-N, on YouTube. And then search for Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac and Dr. Omar Suleiman. I think if you just did Munther Isaac, I-S-A-A-C, just like the name Isaac, and listen to this. It's just unbelievable because after nearly 2 years of the genocide, half of the Christian population in Gaza has been killed or has been forced to flee by the Israeli regime. And despite Palestine being home to Christianity's holiest sites, there in the West Bank and Jerusalem, the Palestinian Christians, being the oldest Christian community anywhere in the world, there may be some in Cairo that might disagree with that, but whatever. Many of the Christians in the West continue to support Israel. And very prominent Christian voices like the Pope, just recently calling for an end of the genocide. Why do Christian Zionists fail to practice the teaching of love your neighbor? And is there a shared history of the Muslims and the Christians in the Holy Land? And how have they gotten along? Well, for 1,400 years, since 600 AD, and then there, a couple of invasions, and then you had the Crusades, and all of that was over money and gold. It wasn't over preserving the Christian faith by any means. They lived together in peace and have lived together in peace. And one of the oldest Christian chapels, cathedrals, whatever, probably not a cathedral, but churches, was just recently bombed by the IDF. And so the Christians in Palestine, and according to, if I understood Reverend Munther correctly, there are about 1,000. When the genocide began, there were about 1,000 Christians in Palestine. And there's only about 500 of them left. They've either got out through Rafah or they've been killed. And so when I see just the increasing audience around the planet trying to do what they can to stop this murder of women and children and people who have nothing to do with Hamas in Gaza, or I prefer calling it Palestine, because that's what it was. Palestine long before it was Israel, at least the 1948 version of Israel. The rest of the world just condemning. But here in America, I don't know. I just think it's the epitome of Christian hypocrisy, that there are those Christian Zionists who push and push and push for Israel to go ahead and build the temple and get the goat, the ox, and set the stage for the destruction of the planet as they understand the book of Revelation to indicate, and the coming of the Messiah to the Jews. And In the meantime, the ongoing slaughter that continues to take place. It just blows me away. And this American bombs that your tax dollars and my tax dollars pay for, that are killing these innocent people. What are you going to do about it? What can you do about it? All right, I've got a few headlines I want to go through. But Reverend Isaac, he's a Lutheran pastor. He's in Bethlehem. And he offered this deeply personal reflection on the death of Pope Francis, highlighting Pope Francis's relationship with the Palestinians, especially the Palestinian Christians. And Isaac sees the departed Pope not as only a religious figure, but a symbol of global compassion, moral courage. And he refers to a couple of moments in particular, the Pope's contact with the Christians in Gaza and his visit to Bethlehem. And you know that Bethlehem is in the West Bank. What the Jews are calling Judea is the West Bank. Samaria, the West Bank. And it's not Israel. But of course, Israel is moving in to take over the West Bank and to annex it. And they're killing the Christians, as you know, not as many as the Palestinians or the Arabs, of course. But the ratio breaks down rather evenly, I think, per capita. The Palestinian Christians are as much a target as the Palestinian Arabs. And the Christians are there speak Arabic. They consider themselves to be Arabs. They just happen to believe in Christ. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for what you're doing. There will be no broadcast at K-Talk today. I don't even know if Lowell will be able to do his show at 9 o'clock. And so this is what Isaac, he's referring to a couple of moments where the Pope was visiting the Christians. The Coptics, that's who I'm trying to think of. The Coptics in Cairo. There's 11 million Coptic Christians in Cairo, and I didn't know that till I went to Cairo. That was 08. I think it was 08. It was just before the Muslim Brotherhood got started. And my wife and I and Paul Toscano and his wife, the four of us went over there together. And we hired an Egyptologist who taught at one of the universities at Cambridge, at King's College or Cambridge or Oxford, I can't remember which, taught Egyptology, and then retired back to Egypt to do tours, private small group tours. So we were in a van, just the four of us and him, and oh my goodness, the things that we got to see. And he talked to us about the Coptic Christians. They have their own pope, and we were taken to this church that's supposed to be the church where Jesus was hidden as an infant from Herod, and that church is still there, or at least it was in 08. But I was just amazed of the 22 million people that live in Cairo. We went to the mosque, the Muhammad Ali mosque, kind of in the center, and it's up on a high platform. So in any direction you look, you can see Cairo. It just goes on and on and on and on. And he pointed out to us that 11 million Christians live there of the Coptic faith. Now, there's a whole mess of Christians in Gaza as well, not nearly that many, but they are as much a target of the IDF as the Palestinian Arabs are. And they just recently, the IDF just recently bombed what I believe is considered to be the third oldest Christian chapel, or the Christian church. It's bigger than a chapel. They just bombed it, and these Christians are being targeted by the IDF snipers. It's not often that I feel like I'm without words. But this ugliness, this just unbelievable ugliness on the part of America, the United States of America, the city with the light on the hill. The light's gone out, I'm afraid. And I don't know how long the patience of God is going to wait on this. But I think what I've just said would sour anything I was going to say about the Pope. But the Pope was in Jerusalem not too long ago and went to the wall. He didn't touch it. He didn't touch the wall. He just raised his hand and said a prayer, and didn't touch the wall, as is what tradition would normally call for. So, as I go through my headlines here that I'm putting together, I'm trying to decide whether I want to get into this Jacobin dictatorship that's in France and what it's doing to try to control Germany, but I think I'm going to move on from there. I want to talk about Germany leading the rest of the world into World War III, but I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to talk about the Immortal Regiment. Maybe you've heard of that. It's to resume in Washington, D.C. It's a march. Years ago, as the Russians who fought in the Great Patriotic War and World War II against the Nazis, as they passed away, a growing number of their descendants and relatives marched annually as the Immortal Regiment, keeping alive the monumental defeat of the Nazis through an ongoing annual living memorial. And the marchers carried photos of the veterans who had passed away, and back in 2022, over 1 million of the Immortal Regiment marched in Moscow, where President Putin gave special notice to the American veterans that participated in the Immortal Regiment. And he said this: "We are aware that U.S. veterans who wanted to come to the parade in Moscow were forbidden to do so by the American State Department. But I want them to know we are proud of your deeds and your contribution to our common victory." And then even in Israel, when the trouble began, and then in 2022, while a remnant of the surviving World War II Jewish veterans gathered for the Immortal Regiment at Israel's Herzl Memorial to the Second World War, various Israeli veteran groups stayed away, reporting their concern that they might be attacked for supporting Russia. So there is now scheduled in Washington, D.C., for the first time in years, in about 2 weeks, a May 3rd Immortal Regiment from Lafayette Square near the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue to the World War II Memorial in downtown Washington. And there flowers are going to be laid and a small concert will be performed. Now, traditionally, the American veterans would walk arm in arm in the Immortal Regiment marches with their Russian counterparts. And the revival of this, well, not counterpart, I should say compatriots. Let me say that. I think that's better. They're Russian compatriots. And the revival of this march on May 3rd, that's just a couple of weeks, is a giant step in the right direction for improved relations between the Russian Federation and the United States. Well, guess who isn't happy about this? Guess who isn't happy about the Immortal Regiment march starting over again here on May 3rd? The Kiev regime, the neo-Nazis, those who just proudly display pictures of Nazism. So Ukrainska Pravda, a news agency, reported that as far as they know, the organizers of the march have the necessary permit, but they are pressing the Washington authorities on the matter to not let this happen. Now, the neo-Nazi Anton Heroshenko, who's associated with the infamous Mairetvret's Hitrist and Ukraine's Internal Affairs Ministry, set out in 2023 to stop all such marches then and in the future. It's just so in your face obvious. So he said this: Russians are now obtaining permission to hold the Immortal Regiment March in many European cities. This march was always a part of Russian war propaganda and the Russian military narrative. Well, he fails to mention that they were always a part of the Allied coalition to defeat Nazism. Not unexpectedly, he called for a mobilization to have all local authorities stop these marches from taking place. You just gotta love this stuff. It's just so, like I said earlier, in your face obvious what's going on, who's behind what. And the neo-Nazi aspect of the Ukraine, or at least the Kyiv regime, just continues to get more and more obvious all the time. Now, I'm going to hit several different topics before I get to Germany trying to start World War III. And if I don't need to go on that long because there's no K-Talk broadcast today. Paul said all the equipment is down. So it worked so well yesterday. I'm really sad to see that taking place today. There's about 1,200 economists now who are issuing anti-tariff statements. I don't think I'm going to get into that here, but here's China in this escalating trade war. 2 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft that were recently, and I'm bringing this up because I find it humorous, recently delivered to China, have now been flown back to the U.S. as a part of this ongoing trade war. One jet returned to Boeing Field in Seattle on the evening of April 20th. The flight data shows the second was en route on the 21st yesterday, and both planes were intended for the Xiamen Airlines of China and are valued at some $55 million each, which follows China's request last week that its airlines pause purchases or leases on American-built aircraft in response to the United States imposing this 145% tariff on Chinese goods. So China, of course, countered with their 125% tariff on U.S. products. China has been Boeing's largest overseas customer with, I think it's about 130 Boeing aircraft still on order for the Chinese airlines. Well, guess what that's going to do to Boeing. So a lot of other lines around the world also want to pause purchases and deliveries of aircraft until these constant, almost week-to-week shifting tariff rates change or normalize. But Airbus out of France, which is Boeing's top rival, might just appear to benefit from this because it's being affected by the trade conflict, which has disrupted shipments for many components from the American suppliers. Even though the Airbus is made in France, a lot of the components are made here in this country. So because we are tariffing France and France is tariffing us, it's just, and as I was saying, I don't know if it was yesterday or last week, the one who suffers the most from these tariffs is the American farmer, and it's going to get worse. So I was listening on Fox this morning to Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth, and I wasn't surprised. I was just taken aback a little bit by the fact, and it only makes sense, that recruitment is the highest it's been in over 20 years in the services because of what Hegseth has been doing. Now, I want to talk about this turmoil that's going on inside the Pentagon right now. John Ullyott, U-L-L-Y-O-T, who's a longtime Trump loyalist, has been brought into the Pentagon, I think had been brought back in January in the getting ready for the changes stuff, to set up the new administration's press operations inside the Pentagon, only to move into Secretary Hegseth's office in March, amidst all the controversy arising from the Pentagon's purge of the DEI materials from its website. And so this Ulyat is the 5th Pentagon official in a week to leave amidst all this turmoil surrounding Secretary Hegseth. So Ulyat announced his resignation last week, saying in a statement that he and Hegseth could not agree on a good fit for him elsewhere in the Pentagon. So last night, Politico published this op-ed by Ulyat, in which he warned that the chaos now that's enveloping Hegseth could lead to Trump firing Hegseth. He says this: it's been a month of total chaos at the Pentagon. From leaks of sensitive operational plans to mass firings, the dysfunction is now a major distraction for the president, who deserves better from his senior leadership. President Donald Trump has a strong record of holding his top officials to account. Given that, it's hard to see Defense Secretary Hegseth remaining in his role for much longer. And this just brings me back to my prophecy back in January, I guess at the time of the inauguration, that the 3 biggies, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, won't be there a year from now. I think Bobby Kennedy Jr. will be. But those 3 I don't think are going to be. I think by January of 2026, they won't be there. I gave my reasons back then. I don't need to go into it again now. But Ulyat in his Politico op-ed says, the latest flashpoint is a near collapse inside the Pentagon's top ranks, citing the firings of 2 of his aides, Dan Caldwell, Darren Selnick, along with Colin Carroll, Chief of Staff to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And he said, in the aftermath, Defense Department officials working for Hegseth tried to smear the aides anonymously to reporters, claiming they were fired for leaking sensitive information as part of an investigation ordered earlier this month. Yet none of this is true, he says. While the department said that they would conduct polygraph tests as a part of the probe, not one of the 3 has been given a lie detector test. In fact, at least one of them has told former colleagues that investigators advised him he was about to be cleared officially of any wrongdoing. Unfortunately, Hegseth's team has developed a habit of spreading flat-out, easily debunked falsehoods anonymously about their colleagues on the way out the door. The last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon, and it's becoming a real problem for this administration, Ulyat says. And, of course, he was bringing up the Signal Gate. And now you see, if you've been watching the news, there's a second chapter, Chapter 2 of Signal Gate. And the reports that Hegseth had brought his wife to 2 meetings with foreign officials at which sensitive matters were discussed. And then this new report from the New York Times on a second Signal chat in which Hegseth shared details about the Yemen strike that included his wife and brother. Ulyat says there are very likely more shoes to drop in short order, with even bigger bombshell stories coming this week. Key Pentagon reporters have been telling sources privately, he says. So Ulyat's remarkable accusations kind of underscores the infighting and the upheaval that has turned up recently in several branches of the government, not just the Pentagon. Ulyat says this is going to make more trouble for Hegseth, who remains under investigation by the Pentagon's Inspector General for his use of Signal to disclose sensitive information about airstrikes in Yemen. And you remember we talked about this when it happened, that Hegseth had shared sensitive details about upcoming U.S. strikes in Yemen, including flight schedules for the F-18s. In a private Signal group, he included his wife, his brother, his personal lawyer, and especially 4 people with knowledge of the chat. These were essentially the same attack plans that he shared on a separate Signal chat. I'm quoting from The Atlantic, the same day that mistakenly included the editor of the Atlantic, and excuse me, it's the New York Times I'm quoting. And according to the Times, Mr. Hegseth's brother Phil and Tim Parlator, who continues to serve as his personal lawyer, both have jobs in the Pentagon, but it's not clear why either would need to know about the upcoming military strikes aimed at the Houthis in Yemen. All right, now if you have been following Tucker Carlson, he is launching these 9/11 interview series with former Representative Curt Weldon. And just like, you know, we were told that when Trump got into office, and Pam Bondi said it, Kash Patel said it, we're going to release all the documents on Kennedy and Kennedy's brother and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all of the government-backed assassinations. And of course, we found out now because of this who really killed JFK. It was redacted. Redacted killed JFK. Well, we were also told that there was a possibility that Trump would create a new 9/11 commission. So in these interviews, and I'm getting a lot of this here from YouTube, but in the first of planned series revisiting all these unanswered questions about the 9/11 attacks, and there are some biggies, as you well know, Tucker Carlson sat down with former Congressman Curt Weldon in a very wide-ranging interview. I invite you to listen to it. That has already drawn nearly 2 million views since its release at least a week ago. So Weldon, who was a former teacher and fire chief, served as vice chair of both the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees during his 2-decade tenure in Congress, where he founded the Fire EMS Disaster Relief Caucus, which he chaired for 20 years. And he accuses the U.S. intelligence agencies of actively suppressing warnings ahead of the 2001 attacks, and says the 9/11 Commission's 2004 report concealed key information, and he says it was just flat out a cover-up, especially the warnings that were given ahead of time. So the 9/11 attack always has had a special place with me because that morning I was interviewing Lyndon LaRouche on the morning of the attack. And I think we were 10 or 15 minutes into the interview, and suddenly people are calling in talking about this attack, and I used the computer to go to TV and could see the attack on the World Trade Centers. And LaRouche said, here's what's going to happen. He said, number one, they're going to blame it on Osama bin Laden. And then he said, number two, this is what's going to allow them to attack Afghanistan. And number three, he said, this is going, and this goes all the way back to January of 2001, where LaRouche said at any time the Congress is going to come out with a real dystopian Security Act. And so on the morning of 9/11, LaRouche said to me on the phone, and this is all a matter of record, this will be the harbinger. This is the harbinger of very draconian, dramatic, anti-freedom Security Act. And of course, the Patriot Act came out of it. So he was correct on all three prophecies. So back to Weldon here. His passion to finally uncover the truth, and it's interesting that Tucker is giving him the format to do this, the forum, which is probably another good reason why Tucker left Fox News, because Fox probably wouldn't allow this. But Weldon was talking about why 9/11 was allowed to occur, because there were warnings ahead of time. Now, imagine you, for business or whatever reason, had to go from Salt Lake to Park City in February, in the midst of one of the worst snowstorms in the history of Utah, where snow was coming down up at the top of Parley's at the summit, a foot an hour, that kind of snow coming down. And you were warned over and over again, don't go over the pass. And no, I've got to get to Park City. I've got something to do with the Sundance Film Festival. And if I don't get this stuff up there, it's going to be a problem. I've got to go anyway. And you're warned, don't do it. And you go up there and you run off the road and you slide down the hillside. And the stuff you were taking is destroyed. You were warned in advance. You decided to go through with it anyway. Whose fault is it? Now, with all the warnings that were coming out about, there was like, 15, I think, war games that were going on at the time. 15 involving Canada, the United States, and several European countries. And with all the warnings that were given, why did they allow it to occur? We said, well, wait a second. Who allowed anything to occur? These Arabs, Muhammad Atta and the boys, just hijacked these airplanes and took off with barely enough flight instruction to take off to land a Cessna 172, which is just a glorified kite. I've flown Cessna 172, Skyhawks. I know what I'm talking about. It's just a glorified kite. Fun, but a glorified kite. And so Weldon was talking about all the many factors that are involved. Chief among them was his devotion to the firefighters, including his good friend Chief Ray Downey of the Fire Department of New York, who died at Ground Zero on September 11th. So Weldon and Downey had collaborated since 1993 World Trade Center bombing, when they worked with the Gilmore Commission to address the problems of communication between intelligence agencies, local responders, which became apparent in that attack. Now, among some of the most striking claims that he made on Carlson's podcast, he said this: in 1993, the Gilmore Commission was established in order to create a fusion center of intelligence sharing in light of poor coordination among intelligence agencies and the failure to stop the attack. On November 4th, 1999, he met with deputy directors of the FBI and the CIA to propose creating an intelligence sharing center out of Fort Belvoir in Virginia. The CIA deputy director's response: absolutely not. Now, that was several sentences there for what did I just say? The Gilmore Commission in 1993 tried to create a fusion center in Fort Belvoir, that's just south of Washington, D.C., for all these intelligence agencies to have a center to share the kind of information that would have alerted 9/11 happenings before it happened. The deputy director of the CIA said, absolutely not. We are not going to create some intelligence sharing. Then sometime in the year 2000, an Army Special Ops Command and DIA project named Able Danger, you remember that, had mapped that what Weldon asserted was every Al-Qaeda cell in the world, including the Al-Qaeda cell they knew about in New York. And the group tried to inform the Department of Justice and the FBI of an imminent terror attack, but they were rebuffed 3 times. Based on the information, Weldon says, that they got from the Al-Qaeda cell in New York City, that an attack on New York was imminent, they were rebuffed by the intelligence agencies 3 times. And the group's analysis included the names of several of the hijackers, including Muhammad Atta. Weldon said that Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who worked on Able Danger, and Tony Schaefer is a regular on the Napolitano podcast. Weldon said that Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who worked on Able Danger, went to Afghanistan after 9/11 to follow up on the leads on Osama bin Laden, and it was then that his office was raided, his files were seized after being summoned by the 9/11 Commission Chair Philip Zelikow, who Weldon accuses of obstructing the investigation. Weldon claims to have multiple sources who say that Osama bin Laden was actually in Baluchistan in Iran and received medical treatment in Tehran, while our boys were getting killed for no reason hunting bin Laden in Afghanistan. Weldon was particularly incensed about that particular point when he was on Tucker Carlson's show, and he said that it was the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated January 3rd, 2020 on Trump's orders, who had arranged for bin Laden to be in Iran, not the Ayatollahs. It was Soleimani himself who did it. So Congressman Weldon traveled to Libya in 2011, which he had previously visited in 2004 and 2008, in an entourage including staffers of Joe Biden and George Bush and an ABC News camera crew. And they received from Colonel Gaddafi a letter expressing his willingness to step down rather than allow his country to be torn to shreds. And then he said that then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had her own ideas, which led her to instead pursue the destruction of Libya and brutal death of Gaddafi. And that woman is still walking out free on the streets. Weldon insists that it's time for a new, actually independent commission to be formed to get to the bottom of 9/11. And he believes that Trump's presidency could make this possible. And everyone who was on Capitol Hill at the time of the report would agree that it was a major cover-up. And he recommended a documentary produced by firefighters called Bravo 7. How far do you think that's going to get? You know, when you release the CIA files and the FBI files on the assassination of JFK, and you get these files back that are just black lines all over the place, what's the purpose in the Freedom of Information Act? And if they were to get the 9/11 Commission's internal reports, you'd see the same thing. And so when Trump was campaigning that he would make sure that this information was revealed, there was also the intimation that they would get to the bottom of 9/11. I wouldn't put money on it. All right, I got a couple of more things here. The German arms going to the Ukraine. In fact, the title of this stream today is Germany setting the stage for World War III. I might want to just, you know what, I don't know that I'm going to have this program go past an hour. I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about, but I don't know that I want to go past an hour. But I want to get into this Germany thing, because this is really important, because Germany has announced a new package of military aid for the Ukraine, which includes armored vehicles, air defense rockets, and howitzers, among other weaponry. And on April 17th, the German government published an updated list of arms and military equipment that it had shipped to the Ukraine. The latest batch encompasses a number of mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, ammunition for the Leopard 2 tanks, as well as the Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, and missiles for the Iris SLM air defense systems. And on top of that, Berlin supplied Kyiv with several Zuzana 2 self-propelled howitzers, 155 millimeter, 122 millimeter artillery rounds, reconnaissance and strike drones, as well as man-portable anti-tank weapons and assault rifles. Now, I went through that list for this reason. The war's over. Russia won. The Ukraine lost. And as I was saying yesterday, the only thing that's stopping the further movement of the Russian forces to the west in 4 major areas that maybe I will take time to get into that, it's the mud season. The frozen ground is thawing. Although the winter this year wasn't as bad as the previous year, there's still a lot of mud. And you can't move these multi-ton vehicles when there's mud. But as soon as that dries, which will be sometime in May, it'll take a couple to 3 more weeks for a lot of that to dry out, then they will move further forward. Now, at the same time, a week ago, Germany is sending all this stuff to the Ukrainian army. Why? A couple of things about Gaza. Smotrich, there's another devil in human form. Israeli finance minister Bezalel, I just refer to him as Baal, Smotrich, declared that a military victory in Gaza is more important than securing the release of the Israeli hostages. That was just in Haaretz. A military victory in Gaza is more important than the release of the hostages. I have this theory in the back of my head that some of these hostages that have not been released by Hamas, they're still alive. But Israel has made sure in back-channel talks with Hamas, that I can't prove this is just my opinion. Israel in back-channel discussions with Hamas, don't let those people out, because they know that half of the people who were killed on October 7th were killed by the IDF. And they're witnesses to that. Hamas is playing them as a trump card, but Israel knows they exist, and Israel does not want them released. Now, I can't prove that, but what Smotrich, old Baal Smotrich said on the right-wing Galai Israel radio station, he said, releasing the hostages, quote, is not the most important goal. We need to eliminate the Gaza problem. You know, it's like a lot of the SS officers in 1942. What are we going to do about the Jewish problem? So he argued that Israel now has a tremendous opportunity to act decisively, stating, there's no more Biden. There's no defense minister Gallant or Gantz or Eisenkot. Now we must storm the Gaza and end the problem and prove to the whole world and the people of Israel there is a military solution to terror. And guess who his #1 supporter is? The weapons your tax dollars are paying for. He also criticized the IDF Chief of Staff Halevi for permitting humanitarian aid into Gaza and dismissed the idea of a negotiated hostage deal as a form of surrender to a terrorist organization. No, we're not going to exchange hostages. That's giving in to a terrorist organization. So, as one might know and understand, there are human beings left in Israel. And this has triggered an intense backlash within Israel. Now, Einav Zankauer, whose son Matan was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th, said, quote, the only truth is that Smotrich is willing to sacrifice my Matan and an entire country for his messianic and psychotic delusions. So the Hostages and Missing Families Forum condemned Smotrich's comments, saying, the families have only one word this morning, shame. At least the minister is revealing the harsh truth to the public. This government has consciously decided to abandon the hostages. Minister Smotrich's history will remember you. You hardened your heart to your brothers and sisters in captivity and chose not to save them, some from death, others from disappearance. Now, you know that there have been, this is a different topic, the U.S. reducing troops in Syria. You know there's been attacks on American bases. Western media is not covering it very much, but the media over there is. And there are American fatalities because of these attacks. Well, who would attack them? Let me back that up. Who that might be trying to create war between the United States and Iran would try to make it look like Iran is attacking these U.S. bases? Right, Israel. So citing an unnamed U.S. official, the Associated Press reported on the 17th that the U.S. will withdraw 600 troops from Syria, leaving fewer than 1,000. The U.S. has maintained about 900 troops in Syria, supposedly to fight ISIS alongside the forces of the separatist Kurdish autonomous state, but had boosted that number to 2,000 following the Hamas attack on Israel back in 2023. The withdrawal reportedly brings the U.S. troop presence back to the pre-October 7th level. Pentagon spokesman's, now what I'm trying to say is, I don't think they're going to tell you the truth here as to why. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell confirmed the next day that U.S. troops were being consolidated in Syria. Defense Secretary Hegseth directed the consolidation of U.S. forces in Syria under Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve to select locations in Syria. This consolidation reflects the significant steps we have made toward degrading ISIS's appeal and operational capability regionally and globally. This deliberate and conditions-based process will bring the U.S. footprint in Syria down to less than 1,000 U.S. forces in the coming months. He promised, however, that as this consolidation takes place, consistent with President Trump's commitment to peace through strength, U.S. Central Command will remain poised to continue strikes against the remnants of ISIS in Syria. We will also work closely with capable and willing coalition partners to maintain. So Parnell's statement does not specifically list which of the 8 bases the U.S. operates in Syria. However, a U.S. defense official told the War Zone that U.S. forces will be leaving the mission support site Green Village and mission support site Euphrates, both of which are in or near the oil fields of the Azor province. What does that tell you? All right. Now, if that wasn't enough to shake up your morning, this one last thing before I jump into something else. U.S. anti-ship missiles are coming to the Luzon Strait. Now, this is from Naval News on the 17th of April, that the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment will be deploying its medium-range missile battery equipped with a Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System to the Luzon Strait, marking the first ever American anti-ship missile deployment to the strategically located Bataan Island chain. Bataan Island is only 200 kilometers south of the southern tip of Taiwan. Now, there's another way to say this. Medium-range missile battery is being sent to the Taiwan area. That's not how you move closer to diplomatic relations with China. 200 kilometers is what, 150 miles? What's 150 miles south of here? Maybe Fillmore? So an unspecified, and I'm getting this from the Navy News, An unspecified number of the anti-ship missile launchers will be airlifted to multiple islands in the Batans from northern Luzon. While no missiles will be fired, what do you put them in there for? A release from the 3rd MLR stated that the base, in coordination with the Philippine Marine Corps 4th Brigade and the Fire's Expeditionary Advance Base, will simulate fire missions in the Luzon Strait. The Nemesis is armed with a Norwegian-manufactured naval strike missile, which is reported to have a range of greater than 200 kilometers. And it's being set up 200 kilometers from Taiwan. How do you suppose the Chinese are looking at that? So the Naval News said this: positioned between the Philippines and Taiwan, the Batan's Islands, now this is not the same as Bataan, it's a different group, are within one of the strategic choke points for transmitting first and second island chains. With a Nemesis 185 missile range, its basing across islands in Batans could threaten vessels entering the 250-kilometer wide Luzon Strait. Nemesis is reported to be deployed for the annual U.S.-Philippines Balakatan exercise, which kicked off today, but maybe it'll be like the U.S. Army Typhoon missile battery, Typhoon, which deployed to the Philippines last year, but never left. So they're talking about full battle testing. They're talking about with the Philippine Army and the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army with these exercises to be able to hit ships in the Luzon Strait. That's not how you get diplomatic relations with China improved. All right, now, when the title of this stream is Germany trying to start World War III? Well, Germany just deployed troops to Lithuania, and you know, in the Baltic states, Lithuania is the one on the bottom, bordering Belarus and Russia on its eastern side. And so now you have German troops in Lithuania in the first permanent foreign deployment of German troops since World War II. Germany has activated its first permanent foreign troop deployment. Now these aren't war game troops. These aren't training troops. These aren't replacement troops. These are a permanent troop set up in a permanent base in Lithuania, establishing a 5,000 strong armored brigade in Lithuania. And so this decision follows on what I've been, Defense Minister Pistorius wanting to be war ready by 2029. He announced back in 2023 that he would bolster the troop presence on NATO's eastern flank in response to the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war. Now remember, it's the United States-Russian war. It's not the Russian-Ukrainian war. It's the United States that is fighting Russia. Ukraine happens to be the battleground, and Ukrainian service people are the cannon fodder, of which there are now over 1 million casualties, more than half of them dead. So that the United States military-industrial complex can still clean out their stores. So the deployment demonstrates, according to this article, Germany's willingness to take a leading role in the conventional defense of Europe. Brigadier General Christoph Huber says, we're not only moving towards operational readiness, we're taking responsibility. Now, according to the Bundeswehr, the brigade will consist of 3 major combat units: a mechanized infantry battalion, a tank battalion, and a multinational enhanced foreign presence battle group, and will be complemented by combat and support elements, and the brigade aims to be at full operational capability in 2 years. Now, how are the Russians looking at that? It's one thing for the Russian or the Germans to send their Taurus missile into Germany, into the Ukraine. You got Germany, then you got to hop, skip, and jump over Poland into the Ukraine, for which the Russians have said, don't do that. And now to the north of Belarus, the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, Lithuania being the biggest one on the bottom, is now going to house 3 battle brigades of 5,000 troops and all the stuff that goes with that of the German army. Now just think about that. I mean, the war's over. The United States is pulling out. So in order for the military-industrial complex to continue their operations and the sales of their product, you've got to have a bad guy, you've got to have a boogeyman, you've got to have war, you've got to have blood, and with blood then there comes recompense and revenge and the need for more and more bullets and more bombs. So the need for additional NATO forces in Lithuania, of course, as I've talked about in the past, is largely due to the geographical location between Russian allied Belarus and the Russian enclave in Kaliningrad. And Kaliningrad is an isolated port city, was once part of Prussia. It was ceded to the Soviet Union after World War II under the Potsdam Agreement. And following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the region was incorporated then back into the Russian Federation and now hosts the country's Baltic fleet, as well as troops, fighter jets, and nuclear-capable Iskander missiles, sitting there in Kaliningrad on the border of the Baltic Sea. And the narrow corridor between Lithuania and Belarus, known as the Suwalki Gap, is widely regarded as NATO's most vulnerable point. So should Russian forces launch an attack on Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, which all are members of NATO, they could potentially sever the supply lines from Poland by linking Belarus and Kaliningrad through an offensive. Stationing permanent NATO troops in the 3 Baltic states serves as what they're calling a long-term security guarantee. So, due to its historical responsibility following World War II, Germany has traditionally maintained a very cautious, restrained military stance. In fact, their constitution limited things to a certain degree. And so the massive defense cuts after the reunification of the 2 Germanys in the 1990s and even into the 2000s further weakened the defense capability of Germany. So in response to this stuff, when Olaf Scholz was the chancellor, he introduced in 2022 the Zeitenwende, the turning point in German security. And so this new security aims to strengthen the defense capabilities, increase military spending to meet NATO targets, which Germany achieved for the first time in 2024 by reaching the 2% mark, which enhances European security cooperation. And as the flagship of that project, Germany is now sending all of this battle group to Lithuania. And Germany has made rather meaningful progress. And this is one of the reasons why Merz, who will be elected chancellor here very soon, is calling for a 900 billion euro redevelopment of military improvement for Germany. way beyond their spending cap. So they need a change in their governmental structure to allow this to take place. Von der Leyen wants 600 billion euros for additional European defense measures against a coming Russian Federation attack to all of Europe. There are people that believe that. There are people that really believe that. But there's a very big difference in what we believe and what we are told is a reality. So what this boils down to, and don't think for a minute when the Trump administration is saying we need to get out of the Ukraine, we need to bring this to an end. And one of the silliest things of all is the Trump administration saying, all right, we've got this peace deal. It's supposed to happen this week, maybe tomorrow, maybe today, between Kyiv and Moscow. And if either side doesn't accept it, we're going to have to move forward with other plans. And you say that in the face of Putin and Lavrov and Gerasimov, who have already said, here's how the game is going to be played. There will be no NATO in Ukraine. Ukraine will demilitarize. Ukraine will denazify. And there will be a new strategic system of protection set up. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is nothing we're backing down from. This is the way it is going to be. And when you start making demands on the conquering army, I can't help but laugh, but there's something going on behind this. The Trump administration wants this issue in the Ukraine to stop and come to an end. And of course, the battle cry is to stop the killing of all of these men and women, not just the Ukrainians, but the Russians. Bring an end to all this slaughter. No, 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 no. That would be the side effect. The real thing is so the U.S. can shift its focus to the Indo-Pacific. Hence, the placement of these anti-ship missiles 200 kilometers from Taiwan just this last week, because that's going to be the next Ukraine. And that's why they want this stuff to end. It's too expensive, and they need all that armament for a coming war with China. And as I said, there's a very big difference in what the average American believes is going on, what we are told, and the reality of the situation. Now, I've got several other things I was going to talk about, but the U.S. setting the timeline for Kyiv to agree to this, which would be an expansion of what I just got through saying, but I think I've said enough. I've got things to do. You've got things to do. I really wanted to get into Russia's next move against the Ukraine if the West doesn't come to its senses at the bargaining table and realize you don't make demands on the country that just won the war. And then I got another article here from Zero Hedge on, was Epstein working for the Mossad or was he working for the CIA? And sexual blackmail and how far back that goes. Probably goes back to the Garden of Eden. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up. There is no K-Talk broadcast today because the equipment is down. And I'm getting several texts from people who listen to K-Talk about how there's nothing coming through. No, there's nothing coming through because the equipment's down. Now, I am working, for you streamers, I am working with my webmaster who will probably be out here in 2 weeks and we're setting up a studio, and we're setting up a system where I will have a series of these during the week of much shorter duration, 20, 25 minutes, on that many different topics that I need to bring to your attention. Because this, already this is an hour and 10 minutes long. It's way too long for podcasts. Even if they're content rich, it's just too much. So I thank you for being a part of this. If you can share these things, tell other people about it, I would deeply appreciate it, because I want to move from K-Talk to this full time. And Kristen, who really is the station manager, said, you can do a series of these, Jack, and link them together in a 2-hour broadcast and forward it to me ahead of time, and I can play it during your time slot, while I would be doing shorter live stream broadcasts with you guys. So thank you very much for participating in this. Your listenership is why I do it. We just want to get the numbers up there where it starts to get some real attention. So, Truth Without a Muzzle, I like that kind of a title. For Global Affairs Unfiltered, I'm Jack Stockwell. I'll be back tomorrow with a health show, and I've got some good topics with some of the good things that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is doing, and the army building against him to stop him from improving the health of America. And then some other things I think that you will find relative. 2 weeks from now, no, the end of next week, I'm going to be in San Diego presenting my work on traumatic brain injury and concussions, and 2 patients that I've been working on with absolutely wonderful response and turnaround in their concussive symptoms. And I'm really looking forward to being able to do that, probably to an audience of at least 150 doctors. So I am excited about that. And I'm excited about a new patient today who's been suffering from migraines for a long, long time. Migraines are so easy to get rid of, because it's usually as simple as the way the head is sitting on the neck, causing muscle tension, pinching nerves that go into the scalp, that gives an ongoing inflammatory response that presents as pain. All right, guys, I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you for being a part of this and supporting the stream. I'll see you later.